And we are recording. Welcome back, everyone. I'm sure we have other folks who are going to be logging in the next minute or two. Yeah, all right. So I want to, I'm going to share the screen here for you. I have some imagery that I think might be useful in continuing to tell the story of my teacher and his history and his methods. So let me just share the screen. Let's see, and there's the keynote I want to share. Okay. So let me just expand that a little there. Okay. So I'm going to get rolling here. I'm sure we still have a few people logging in. If you can see, just wave if you can see the screen. Lydia, is the screen visible? The keynote? Yeah? Good. So Desikachar, of course, is the son of T. Krishnamacharya. Krishnamacharya has been referred to as the father of modern yoga, and there's certainly justification for that, considering the immense influence that he had on some key students of his who became very well-known teachers in their own right. Two of them, of course, we see here, both doing a pose that has the same name, Warrior One, but a very different expression in each of them. On the left is Pattabhi Jois, on the right is Iyengar. And although this is not a session specifically about the history of this teaching tradition, it's important to note that the era in which Pattabhi Jois was trained and in which Iyengar had his exposure to the teachings of Krishnamacharya was an earlier era than Desikachar had access to. For example, this rather famous photo, which some of you may have seen, it's been around for a while, was taken, we believe, in 1935. And the reason it couldn't have been later than 1935 is that if you look here, and can everyone see my arrow? I'm kind of jiggling my arrow there. This individual here, this young boy, is named Keshavamurti. Keshavamurti we know from his appearance in Krishnamacharya's book that was published in 1934 called the Yoga Makaranda. Here he is doing the same position. I don't believe he is standing on that foot, even though the photo is oriented that way, because that is not the shape a foot takes when you're putting weight on it. So I think he was like, I don't know, lying down or leaning against something, but he's clearly doing the same split on the same side there. This is Keshavamurti as well. We know that he left Krishnamacharya's household in 1935. So it would have been the same year this photo was taken. Keshavamurti, along with a couple of other very flexible young boys, here's another one depicted in that book, the Makaranda, doing the backward-facing version of Uttanasana. By the way, that is an Uttanasana. The word means intense stretch, right? So they're both intense stretches, but one is Adho Mukha Uttanasana, the one that we just commonly call Uttanasana these days, showing Krishnamacharya on the left doing that. And this is Tiryanga Mukha Uttanasana, which is a backward-facing Uttanasana. So these young boys were living in the household of Krishnamacharya, receiving a very intense, frankly, abusive training. from him. He was a very, very strict teacher. And one by one, they ran away. And the only one left who couldn't run away, who had no place else to go, and he was all alone when his only friend at that point, Kesharamurti, ran away, was Iyengar. He's older here, of course, but he was a young boy at that point, and he then received instruction from Krishnamacharya because Krishnamacharya had run out of young boys to demonstrate poses, and he needed them because he was doing a lot of demonstrations in those days. The Maharaja of Mysore, who was one of the richest men on the planet at the time, was the patron of this famous yoga school, the Shala, at the Jagan Mohan Palace in Mysore. By the way, in this photo, my arrow here, you can see my arrow. That is Patabi Joyce right there in the headstand. Okay, Iyengar is not in the photo because he was not really receiving training at that point. He was an impoverished relative of Krishnamacharya's. In fact, he was his brother-in-law. Iyengar's sister, older sister, was Krishnamacharya's wife. There she is in her wedding photo. That is Krishnamacharya, a man already in his late 30s, early 40s, holding his diplomas. These are very prestigious degrees he got from these institutions of higher learning in India. And she looks scared witless. She is 11 years old in her wedding photo. That was not uncommon. Yes, Andrea, I see your face. Everyone's should be making a face. That was not uncommon. She came from a poor family, widowed mother. They started having children later. They were not having children when she was 11, so at least you can, console yourself with that fact. But that is my teacher's mother. That is Namagiri Amma. That's her name. Namagiri Amma was Desikachar's mother. But he was born in 1938. This was all happening here in 1935. And the way Krishnamacharya taught back then was very different. And the way he expressed his teachings in written form in the Yoga Makaranda was very different as well. But here we see the format he used for his book, which it kind of looks familiar to me. Does it look familiar to you? Have you seen a similar format in another yoga book? Sure you have. Light on Yoga. Clearly, Iyengar drew inspiration from the way his teacher, brother-in-law, had organized his descriptions and photos and labeling of these poses. There is a PDF of this book, parts 1 and 2, the Yoga Makaranda, on that webpage we created for you. And it's a free PDF to download. It's public domain at this point. Feel free to peruse that, and you will see that a lot of the poses that he put in there, including the standing poses we're so familiar with, are for the very first time being cataloged and described in tremendous detail. Now, all of this was happening, of course, before Desikachar was born. He was born in 1938. And when independence came to India, and the Shala eventually closed in 1950, Krishnamacharya relocated to Madras in 1952. And he was much more in demand at that point, not as a yoga master training, young boys and, putting on demonstrations to prove the value and the power of yoga. There was a political reason why these yoga demonstrations were happening. There was a very strong movement in India at the time for independence, and the Maharaja was part of that, and he wanted to demonstrate, as many people did, that yoga had its own indigenous forms of fitness and health. And so yoga as a practice for conditioning the physical body was very much the agenda in those days. And prior to that, it had much more of a reputation as being a meditative process. The Hatha Yoga and Tantric lineages had a rather different focus. than the one we have come to recognize as this asana-based fitness focus, and then bringing sort of the medical explanations in of why it's working and so on. That was all really getting started in that era, in the 20s, 30s, 40s in India. And so in Madras, Krishnamacharya was much more in demand as a healer. And he worked one-on-one with people, and that's how he taught Desikachar to work. He would take their pulse, he would talk to them, he would take their history. He had this whole Ayurvedic context of dealing with people. And that is the era in which Desikachar was trained and learned from his father. So the very same man, meaning Krishnamacharya, who in his book, the Makaranda, would say things like, under no circumstances must the straight leg in Baddha Konasana be bent even a little bit. He was very specific about the ideal shapes of these poses, and he wrote it down in this book. You can read it. Okay, the very same man who would say that would also say in his later years that yoga, above all else, must be adapted to the individual and not the other way around. Same guy. But it's the guy who made that latter statement that trained his son Desikachar to do what we now recognize as yoga therapy. And so through all of this, Desikachar brought his particular way of looking at things to what he was learning from his father. He was trained as a structural engineer. In his late teens, 20s, he was attending school. It's very desirable for a son in an Indian family to become, a doctor, an engineer. Engineering is a very highly valued thing for someone to do, and he had achieved some status even as a young engineer, and he was offered a job in a very prestigious firm, and he was about ready to start that job. And he was home visiting his family in Madras before embarking on this career as a structural engineer. And he witnessed something that changed his life, changed my life, changed a lot of people's lives. He witnessed one morning this foreign car pull up in front of his father's house. Now, the fact there was a foreign car was notable because at that time, there was only one car in India. It was called an ambassador. It looks a little bit like a checker cab. And they didn't import cars. They only allowed their own domestic cars to be driven around there. And there was just this one kind of car. So the fact that it was a foreign car meant that this was an important person, some kind of diplomat probably owned that car. And as it turns out, that was true. This very tall, white woman gets out of the car. Turns out she's from New Zealand. Mrs. Malvinan was her name. Her husband was a diplomat from New Zealand. She gets out of the car. She goes straight up to Krishnamacharya, who's sitting on his porch, and hugs him. This is unheard of. You don't do that if you're a woman or a white woman or any kind of woman to a Brahmin like Krishnamacharya. You just don't. But he very graciously accepted the hug. They had a few words. She got back in the car and drove off. And Desikachar is witnessing this scene going, what the hell just happened? Now, he knew his father was a yogi. He knew, his father taught him yoga when he was a child, and he kind of reluctantly took his lessons. He talks about climbing the tree in the backyard to escape his yoga lessons, and his father yanking him down, taking the clothesline off, and tying him up in Baddha Padmasana to teach him a lesson about his yoga lessons, right? He was a strict dude back in the day. And so, that was kind of his relationship to yoga. And his father would make him demonstrate when he was younger and all that. But, he went off and did his own thing, Desikachar. But he knew his father had cases, as he called them, patients, clients, students. So he goes over to his father and says, what just happened? Who is that woman? Why did she hug you? He says, that's Mrs. Malvinan. She's one of my cases. And for many years, she suffered from a terrible insomnia. And last night, because of the work I've been doing with her and the practice I gave her, she was finally able to sleep for the first time. And so she was very happy. And so she hugged me. And that somehow just got into Desikachar's head. And as an engineer, it grabbed his curiosity in a way. It was like, how does that work? How does this old, and remember, you have to remember how old Krishnamacharya was when he got married, right? He was in his 40s. His wife was in like 11, right? So when Desikachar was born in 1938, he was already 50 years old, right? So this old man is doing something really interesting. And it got him curious. And he developed a strong desire to figure out how this worked. And he never showed up for that job at the engineering firm. He asked his father to be taught yoga. He wanted to learn it initially for the health benefits, to how to make people healthy. He wanted to know from that perspective about yoga. Now, of course, Krishnamacharya wasn't just about that perspective. He was a scholar. He was a religious man. He had mastered all of the scriptures. He knew them by heart. He was a scholar par excellence, as well as a yogi. And so, he got his son to agree to study all of it with him, including the Yoga Sutra and that. And that began his studies. And for over 30 years, every day, every morning, he would sit with his father and learn Yoga Sutra, and he would learn the Brahma Sutra, and he'd learn Bhagavad Gita, all of the whole corpus that he was able to learn from his father, as well as learning not just how to practice yoga, but how to teach people how to practice yoga. He had an apprenticeship. Krishnamacharya would watch him teach his students. You can't imagine something more intimidating as a novice teacher teaching a student one-on-one with Krishnamacharya looking over your shoulder, And Desikachar would also be permitted to observe his father working with his students. And that's how he learned. And because he brought his engineer's perspective to this whole process, he actually did develop a few sort of unique things. He, we believe, is the first person to record these sequences using stick figures. And he had a very elegant hand. This is not his personal drawing here. Those are printed in a book that he helped produce to catalog all of the practices. I have some drawings that he did for me. Very, very simple things.
Leslie, you'll have to stop sharing your screen
Yeah.
so we can see.
I know. So this, I don't know if you can make it out, but it's just very, very simple little stick figures, nothing complicated, but he had a lovely way of drawing them and communicating with the stick figures. And he shows also variations, right? So for example, these simple movements can be varied in an almost infinite number of ways, using props, okay, placing one knee forward of the other knee. So yes, he learned some of this from his father, but the degree to which he was able, using his engineer's perspective, remember, a structural engineer understands the forces of tension and compression, understands the importance of the base of support for anything that needs support, And so he brought this way of recording the practices to the world. Also, that exercise we did just before the break, and we're going to get back to that shortly and keep developing that. He also developed ways of describing and talking about and visually representing breath and movement. Like when you move your body and your breath at the same time, when they begin and end at the same time, if you represented it graphically, it would look like this. The length of the breath, length of the movement are the same. They begin and end at the same time. Very simple. But what we did, that little variation we did, the third thing we did would be represented this way. So if we wanted to make a little diagram of what we did on the exhale, we'd say, oh, well, we started the breath for a little bit before we started the movement. And so from that, you can develop, you can say, okay, what about if you breathe? What about if you exhale and then move? What if you move on Baya Kumbhaka, we call it? You'd represent it this way, right? You exhale first and then you move, right? And so there's just all these different ways of representing the breath. And I've expanded on this a little bit with some of the work I've done. By the way, Lydia produces all of these wonderful graphics. There's, for example, envelope action. What does that mean? Well, it means that the breath surrounds the movement. You can see here that the line representing the breath starts before the movement and the movement ends, but then the breath continues. So now you're surrounding the movement with breath. But you can surround the breath with movement. You can do the same thing in reverse, right? And so just these simple ways of graphically representing things, right? And these are some of my stick figures. Lydia loves my stick figures, and I just thought I'd throw that in there because it makes her smile whenever she sees my drawings. And so I've kind of taken this idea a little bit further. I have like these breath equations. And I know that looks very weird and complicated, but it's actually not, right? It's just basically, if you look at the key to it, you'll see that AB just means abdominal breath. And what is that? It means the diaphragm contracts, plus the rib cage is stabilized, closed, plus the abdominal wall is relaxed. See, so this is like a decoding some of the anatomical actions that go into producing different breath patterns. So taking some of Desikachar's work in graphically representing what's going on, I've done the chest breath, for example, CB, chest breath equals, well, the diaphragm's still contracting, plus the rib cage is relaxed and the abdominal wall is stabilized. So the same contracting diaphragm will either move the belly or move the rib cage, depending on whether the rib cage is held still or the belly is held still. If the diaphragm contracts when you're holding the belly still, the rib cage will move. If the diaphragm contracts when you're holding the rib cage still and the abdominal wall is relaxed, of course, permitting the movement to happen, then you'll get a belly breath. So this is, just inspired by Desikachar. Kapalabhati, very interesting pattern. What is that? Diaphragm is relaxed, plus the rib cage is stabilized open, plus the abdominal wall is contracting. We say lower abdominal wall there. There should be an L there, really, because we're isolating the action, the lower abdominal wall, when they change that next time you do that graph. That's the original drawing of the logo, by the way. That's my hand-drawn version of the logo. Because there was that question about it, and its provenance. So that was just some of the things I want to graphically share with you. I know that people do have questions about Desikachar and his heritage and sometimes his family, and why are his teachings so different from those of Iyengar, those of Pattabhi Jois, Indra Devi. And some of it is explained by the history and the generational gap, and the fact that Krishnamacharya evolved his perspective over a very long life and a very long teaching career. And the fact that he was more employed as a physician, as a healer in Madras once the whole Mysore thing was shut down. So any questions at all about that before I want to go to the mat and show you some of the in practice, some of the things that I learned from Desikachar and have sort of developed in my own direction. So anything at all about any of that? So this is some of the, let's say, institutional memory, if you will, of this teaching tradition. Is that Judy? Are you just fiddling with your camera? Or are you trying to unmute yourself? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Anything at all? Really? There's usually questions about all of this stuff. Huh? No? No one's? No? Okay. Really? Cool. Okay. All right then. Has anyone ever heard the term Vini Yoga? You familiar with that term? Yeah? Okay. Are you wondering why I don't use it? Or why some people use it and some people don't? Has that ever been a question? No? I don't have to talk about it.
That's a good one to ask.
Is it? Yeah. Vini Yoga, it's a word that appears in the Yoga Sutra, by the way. It's not a made up word. And it means modification. It means to modify something for a particular purpose or in a particular context. And it was picked up on first by some of his European students, some of Desikachar's European students. And it's used still quite widely in Europe by those students and the students of those students. I mean, there's a few generations of students at this point. There's a good number of people still teaching who are far senior to me, both in age and experience in this tradition. And they've trained hundreds, thousands probably of teachers through the decades. And a lot of them in Europe use the term Vini Yoga. In the States, in North America at least, Gary Kraftsow was the one who uses that term. And he was actually encouraged by Desikachar to call his school the American Vini Yoga Institute, AVI. And he never stopped using it. He never stopped using that term. In 2003, Desikachar sent out a note. Well, let's just say there was a note that was sent out with Desikachar's name on it. It's not the same thing as Desikachar sending a note. We suspect that the note may have been written by his son, or at least instigated by his son. And in this note, he asked us to stop using that term, Vini Yoga. Us meaning all of his students. Anyone that wanted to maintain a connection with him, he would say, should stop having a connection with this term, because he was very disappointed in the way it was being used. People were branding things and asserting some kind of connection with him or his father's teachings that may or may not have existed. And he was very resistant. You know, there is evidence that I saw with my own eyes of him always trying to tear down these structures that people tried to build up around him, you know. To build him up as a guru of some kind was intolerable to him, and he really did his best to not let people put him in that position. And that has to do also with, you know, like the Vini Yoga America was an organization that existed back in the 80s and 90s, and they were organized for the purpose of sponsoring these events and trainings with Desikachar. And he didn't like that. He didn't like having an institution or an organization or a committee in between him and the personal relationships that he enjoyed with his students. And so he asked them to disband themselves, which created tremendous consternation in some of his students that had spent a lot of time and energy organizing this thing. And so I wasn't at all surprised to get this note in 2003 saying, you know, please don't use this term Vini Yoga. And I wasn't invested in it at all, and I stopped. And I started calling what I taught individualized breath-centered yoga. Now, in his later years, Desikachar, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, decided to put his son Kaustubh in charge of his teachings and trainings and all of that, and he gradually withdrew. Whether this was a sign of early dementia, I like to think that it was a symptom of early dementia, that he thought Kaustubh was the right person for this job. But it was probably just a father wanting his son to basically inherit the family business. But inheriting a family business is different than being the holder of a lineage. The best person to hold that lineage is not always the direct relative. But for better or for worse, Kaustubh took over. He's a problematic individual for a variety of reasons. not the least of which is that he decided he was going to trademark the word Vinaya Yoga to prevent anyone else from using it unless they had his approval. And so that's kind of the status of it now. And when he came out with this warning to people not to use the word because he had the legal rights to it, I had not used the word for years, didn't care about it. Made me want to start using it again. So I wrote this article called, what was it? Oh yeah, I teach Vinaya Yoga, so sue me. That was the name of the article. But it just means modification. It means adapting the practice. That's all it means. And that's what we do. We adapt the practice to the individual. So, yeah. See, I asked a question and I got to answer it because no one asked a question. So, yeah.
Leslie?
Yeah.
Leslie, you don't actually have the current version of the breathing equations. We fixed that a while back. So
Oh, we did fix it a while back. Okay. Oh,
and
thank
I
you.
put it in the chat. So.
Oh, excellent. Thank you, honey. Yeah, sometimes I have an older thing that I haven't updated. Yeah, it says lower abdominal wall. Thank you. Great. It's in there. I'll make sure that's the one that gets in the PDF.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else before we move on? Yeah. Anything about Desikachar, yoga therapy? No. Sadly, I have very few photos of me with him. I mean, this was before we were always carrying cameras around in our pockets, and it just sort of never occurred to me to pose with him.
Hey, Les?
Yeah.
I'm thinking if people don't have a lot of questions, maybe you could do a little more practice that.
Yes, that's what I promised to do. I just want to make sure there were no questions and everyone felt like if they had one, they were free to ask it. So anything? Yeah. Andrea has one. Okay. Go for it, Andrea.
Did his wife practice yoga at all?
Menika, sure, absolutely. She taught and practiced. I studied asana with Menika when I was in India. So yes, absolutely. And they have a daughter, Mekla, who taught from a young age, because there were many children who were being taught at the KYM. They had all these programs for children, and children with developmental issues would often come, and they had a whole program for them. Desikachar's oldest son, Bhushan, is developmentally disabled. And so he was not, ordinarily the oldest son would be the one who would be trained and groomed and all of that, but he was incapable of that. Mekla decided to become an engineer, interestingly, and she eventually moved to Michigan with her husband and daughter, and that left Kaustubh, the youngest, and he was the one who got the training. And I don't mean to disparage the knowledge that he received, which was tremendous from his father, but having knowledge is not the same thing as having wisdom. And that is what has turned out to be sorely lacking in him. But yes, Menika is still teaching, as far as I know. She's still there teaching, and a lot of the teachers that Desikachar trained are still teaching at the KYM, at the Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram. So there's a question here from Marilyn. What is his son's focus currently? Still individual focus and training? We're talking about Kaustubh now? Yes? Yeah. He has training programs. He does. I don't know if it's organized in the like 200 or 500 hour format, but he does offer regular workshops and training programs. And I'm expecting now, as everyone is doing, a lot of that is moved to online, and he offers it through what he calls the KHYF, which is different from the KYM. Okay, Kaustubh and his mother have split from the KYM. That's a whole different set of teachers in Chennai. And so the work that he does is with what he calls the KHYF, which is the Krishnamacharya Healing and Yoga Foundation. And he's easy to find. He's certainly not hiding. So he's there doing his thing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
May I ask an
Go ahead.
additional question?
Sure.
You mentioned Ayurveda as part of the earlier practice and working with people from a holistic point of view. Do they focus on a part of Ayurveda, or is it just so seamless that it is just the way of the yogi?
Sure. Well, Krishnamacharya was very conversant in Ayurveda, and he used Ayurveda. He used astrology. He used gems. He used ritual. With his cases, depending on their cultural context. If they were Indian, all of that was on the table. He was dealing with, a foreigner who had a different cultural context. Of course, he would take that into account. And Desikachar was very much focused on people's cultural context. He was always very leery of Americans who wanted to come over to India and have an Indian teacher and take an Indian name and start wearing Indian clothing and doing all the Indian things. He was always saying, you've got your own culture. What is so bad about your culture? You need ours, He was very interested in what he called svadharma, which is a concept you find in the Bhagavad Gita. Like, what is your own path, your own personal path? He taught a whole week-long seminar on that one theme of svadharma. And Ayurveda is a part of it. And Desikachar was trained in it, and so was Kaustubh to some extent. But whether you're also gaining skills in Ayurveda that you're using in your practice alongside the yoga to help people, there are Ayurvedic terms and concepts that show up in Desikachar's yoga. The most prominent is Brahmana and Langana. Okay, Brahmana and Langana. Brich, the word Brahmana comes from the root brich, which we get the word bright from. It means to expand. Something's expansive, something that energizes, something that's nutritive to the system. These are Ayurvedic terms, but they were applied to the breath-centered practices in the yoga. So it is said that the inhale, the chest region, prana, expansion, opening, backbending, standing, all of these things are Brahmana. When you're vertical, when you're weight bearing, when you're doing something more energetic, when you're building up the inhale, when you're building heat in the system, these are all said to be Brahmana practices. Now, all of those things have a counterpart, which are the opposite. Instead of building heat, you're cooling down. Instead of exciting, you're calming. Instead of practicing vertically, maybe you're horizontal. Instead of focusing the breath in the chest, maybe you're focusing the breath in the belly. So now it's in the realm of apana, not prana. You're reducing, because langana in Ayurveda means to reduce. You're taking something out of the system, not putting something into it, right? Like fasting is langana. Kriya is langana, because you're removing things from the system. And so the breath practices that emphasize that kind of quality are langana. And so those are Ayurvedic concepts, but they show up in the way that these practices are contextualized, for an individual. But you can't always assume that what affects one person one way is going to affect someone else another. For example, some people are not energized by back bends. Some people are not calmed down by forward bends. If you say forward bends are langana, what you're leaving out of that statement is the most important thing, which is context. For whom? For whom are forward bends langana? For whom are backward bends brahmana? You can't make those statements without attaching them to an individual. You can't say anything about alignment in an asana without attaching that statement or that inquiry to an individual, which is why I always say asanas don't have alignment, people have alignment. It's a different statement altogether. So if I were to cue something like, okay, I'm going to switch cameras here because we're going to segue into some practice. Okay. It's like, okay, now you're welcome to join in with me here. Okay. because that was the perfect segue. This is exactly where I wanted to go with this. Let me just get a little sip of coconut water here. Oh, did that glugging come across on my microphone? Was that just completely, yeah,
That was kind of
loud?
gross. Yeah, that was kind
That
of
was
gross.
gross? Sorry. Okay. So if I were to say, we are going to practice Virabhadrasana 1, and the alignment for Virabhadrasana 1 is this. We start in Tadasana. We then turn one of our feet 40 degrees to the side in external rotation. We then step the other leg forward, a big enough step to get that front thigh parallel to the floor. And then the alignment for Virabhadrasana is we then square our pelvis to the front so that our two hip crests are pointed straight down the road, okay? And we need to be aware of not collapsing the back arch as we square our hips forward. And then we raise our arms up into a back bend. And then I can talk about all of the, I'm going to step out of that because that totally sucked for my body. Sorry if it sucked for you. You're welcome to come out of that now. And once I'm there, then I can start thinking about all the things my kneecaps and skin and all of that need to be doing. Now, I'm sure that some of you have been in classes where things have been instructed that way, okay? That's teaching to the pose, not teaching to the person. That's saying, this is the alignment for Virabhadrasana. Here's how you do it. If, however, I do it this way, okay? Starting in a samastiti stance with the heels under the sitting bones, and we can have a whole conversation of what that means and how to do it. But for now, I'm just going to say, okay, from this stance, I'm going to turn one of my feet to the side a bit, okay? There's no specific number there of degrees. It's just going to turn to the side. It's going to externally rotate. That's going to be the back foot. It will find where it needs to be based on having to keep those 3 points of the foot in contact with the ground. I'm then going to step the other foot forward. And here, rather than going for a specific shape or a parallel to the floor kind of a thing, here's an interesting functional question that an engineer would think of asking. It's like, well, how far forward can I extend that step so that I can still get out of it with just my leg strength? In other words, the thing that got me into it should be able to get me out of it too. If I step too far, then I need to use the momentum of my upper body to get out of it, right? And now once I'm in this stance, can I still find my samastiti? Can I still find all 3 points of both my feet? And when I want to turn my body around to the front, I want to do it in such a way that it doesn't compromise my base of support, doesn't compromise my foundation. So squaring the pelvis kind of does that. It kind of makes that little toe side of my back foot want to levitate and the arch collapse. So is there some other way I can turn? Well, as it turns out, yeah, I have all of these joints here in my spine, in my rib cage, and I can turn from my sternum. I can turn from there and kind of feel that twist, that turning action coming all through my body. And my pelvis will contribute some of that, but not all of it. And I might be able to do that and still keep a sense of samastiti. And now when I want to change the shape into a warrior one shape, can I use my breath to get me there? can I play with the relationship of this movement, this vinyasa, that takes me from a starting position into a shape? Can I play with it in such a way that my breath can be a part of not only how I get there, but what I'm feeling once I arrive? See, because if I value this three-dimensionality of my breath, the front and the back and the sides and the top and the bottom, that might inform how I want to hold my arms. For example, if I reach too far up, okay, it feels like I'm cutting off the top of my breath and the tops of my lungs. Why would I want to do that? If I reach my arms too far forward, I feel like I'm cutting off the front of my breath. If they're pinched too far back, I'm losing the backs of my lungs. So by putting the breath at the center of this and letting each person find functionally where their feet need to be, that's a whole different process, right? So that must have been sucky. I kind of had you do the same pose in two very different ways on the two sides of your body, if you were joining along with me. And you may want to go back and fix that first side now, I don't know. But that's the difference between teaching to the pose, saying, here's the alignment for Virabhadrasana 1, and we're going to learn and make our bodies do that alignment. That was the first way I cued it. The second way was me as a person, as an individual, is going to have an experience of being in this shape based on how my body is, how my joints are arranged, and how well I can stay, and how I have to arrange my body parts in such a way that I can step into the shape without losing my foundation, without losing my samastiti, without losing the connection to the 3 points in both my feet, without losing the three-dimensionality of my breath. You know, I'm letting all of those sort of functional concerns determine my placement and the shape I eventually end up with. So that's the difference between, you know, saying that an asana has alignment and saying that a person can find alignment for themselves or within themselves. So,
So I just want to clarify, Leslie, in this case, let me start my video. In this case, you are saying that one of those two ways of cueing is the better way. Unlike the previous one you gave 2 examples.
I am saying that one way, thank you. I'm making a strong case for it. Let's put it that way. But I would never go so far as to say that the first way of teaching it is wrong or not useful to some people. Obviously it is. Otherwise, Iyengar yoga never would have taken off, right? All of that cueing is Iyengar cueing, right? I didn't make it up out of thin air. And I'm sure you guys have heard it cued in a similar way, you know? What it does is it gives people this external form to help them, to help provide for them a structure that they can relate to without having to figure out too much of why they're doing what they're doing, other than to do the pose correctly. That obviously has a lot of resonance and attraction for people. All I'm saying, I do like to make a case for the second way of doing it as being preferable for me and the way I teach, and to help people with a lot of the problems they develop practicing the other way, practicing in ways that may not be completely appropriate for their bodies. That doesn't mean that that first way is wrong or bad or shouldn't be done. It's just that that's the only way it's been done for a very long time for very many people. And so I'm making a strong case for having this alternative point of view, this alternative method, which is more functional, which is more individualized, which involves more I would say introspection, more swadhyaya. So yeah, I would never say one way is bad and one way is good. Each way is good for something. And if it's promoted as the only way, then that's when you run into trouble. I would never say that my way of doing it is the only way of doing it. But to contextualize this in terms of Desikachar's ethos, his teaching ethos, right? He would be much more interested in getting people to find their own expression of the shape. He would always say, and this is him speaking as much as an engineer, as a yoga teacher, that the form of the practice must serve the function. The form of the practice must serve the function. Think of building a bridge. You can build a very beautiful bridge, very elegant, very delicate. It's a wonderful thing to look at, right? And if a breeze comes along and blows it down, it's not a good bridge. It's not functional as a bridge. I would much rather cross over on a bridge that was ugly, but worked as a bridge. In fact, Desikachar's yoga was called ugly yoga for many years. They called it ugly yoga because it was so modified. It didn't look like the photos. It didn't look like, the images people had of these classical forms, because they were modified for the people. And, no one ever had the desire to produce a Vinaya yoga calendar, January. Doesn't look like something you'd put on the wall and stare at for a month. Modified. So I'm seeing some, okay. So there's some questions here, going back to the Kaustubh question. Do I think Kaustubh approaches things differently because he came along later in Desikachar's teaching versus his initial teachers? I don't know how much I said about how differently Kaustubh approaches things. I just said he had a lot of knowledge and not a commensurate amount of wisdom. But I don't think I said anything specific about his approach vis-a-vis his father's approach. So I don't even know if I'm qualified to say what that may be. I've seen him teach, but his father was always present when I observed Kaustubh teaching. I actually did see him deliver one program when his father wasn't around, and it did not go well. He managed to insult just about everyone in the room. So I don't know that that's even a question that I would have raised in my comments about him. Jennifer asked, did they equate those terms, Brahmana Langana, with the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems? Desikachar was very reluctant to draw those lines between Ayurveda and things like physiology and neurobiology and things like that. He left that to doctors, he left that to other people. Those lines have been drawn, and certainly it's very tempting to say, oh yes, Brahmana is sympathetic arousal and Langana is parasympathetic arousal, but it's really not that cut and dried and not that reductionistic, because here's the closest thing that Desikachar said that I would link to the organization of the autonomic nervous system is his definition of sthira and sukha. Find it in Heart of Yoga, in which you'll see his translation and commentary of the Yoga Sutra. When he translates sthira sukhama sanam, that's the famous asana sutra, right? Sthira and sukha. So the way he translates that is sthira is alertness without tension, and sukha is relaxation without dullness. And so sympathetic arousal isn't just about a stress response. It's not like that's a negative thing necessarily, which some people interpret it, because it's bad to get stuck in one or the other. You don't want to get stuck in parasympathetic either, right? So being stuck is definitely a problem, but sympathetic arousal is about being alert and paying attention. And you can do that in a relaxed way that isn't tense. So we said alertness without tension. And then sukha, relaxation without dullness, the same thing. You know, you can be in an alert, relaxed state. Alertness does not negate relaxation, nor the other way around. So these are qualities that we're always looking to balance in ourselves. And when someone is experiencing what they would describe as brahmana, you know, energized, it could be a very relaxed state of energization, you know. When they're experiencing something as langana, as being sort of relaxed and calm and like they've let go of something that they were holding on to that they didn't want to hold on to, because langana is about removing things from the system also. You can also feel very energized by that. So you can feel relaxed through energization, you can feel energized through relaxation. So it's kind of a complex thing that each individual is going to describe differently. Christopher, way two worked better for my SI joints. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that tomorrow. We're going to get more into the structural anatomical stuff about how we work with the spine tomorrow. Yeah, one of the reasons I would teach Warrior One that way is for people that have issues with their SI joints or with their pelvis in general, because there's much more of muscle activation in the muscles that support the arches of the feet and in the legs in general than when you're more fully extended and just sort of propping on your joints, bones, and connective tissue, which is what tends to happen there. Which is why when you're in that more extended version of it, which is the first way I taught it, you'll often also get the cueing of, okay, now we have to micromanage what our muscles are doing, right? Because they're not an inherent integral part of how you got into that pose and how you're sustaining it. It's more like you've just propped yourself into a shape and dropped your weight into it, and then you have to think of what your muscles need to do. And that's the other thing that's interesting, is that if you find yourself in an asana and then you have to do all the alignment stuff to make it safe or correct once you're in that shape, then that's a pretty good indication that you might want to reconsider how you got there in the first place. Because the muscle actions that arrive you into a shape should be the ones that are present, that keep you safe in the shape. You shouldn't have to all of a sudden do extra things once you get there. So, yeah. So let's go back to the mat again. And this is, let me see, okay. Now, do any of you have access to something like a chair or a stool or something like that? You see, I brought this little stool that we have here. It's got nice storage inside. Oh, there's a yoga strap in there. That's where that strap was. I was looking for that. How long ago did that disappear in there, honey? That's been...
I don't think it disappeared at all. It was just where it was put.
Well, it disappeared to me because I forgot that we put it there. Cool. Okay. So, and this can be done actually for people that need to do seated practice. Like if you have someone that's on a chair and needs to be on a chair, you can have another chair here for them to sort of aim at for their range of motion. There's all sorts of ways to modify these things. But my goal here is to show you how some of the very, very simple things that Desikachar taught can have a very profound difference on how we're feeling ourselves. So, you know, he would often use this as a starting position, you know, in Vajrasana. Now, for me, at this point in my life, my knees don't bend all the way anymore. They used to, but I'm old, and I've got some history of meniscus surgery and so on in my knees. So I'm not going to use this as a starting point. I'm going to be up here on my knees. But for those of you that are able to go all the way back and sit on your heels, you can, maybe go all the way down. Now, this is one of the most common movements that he would teach from kneeling. Okay. And yes, he would occasionally ask people to reverse their breathing, but generally it was through chanting. Like, for example, one of the things that we would often do would be Om Namo Namaha, or something like that. And then if he wanted us to lengthen our breath, he would just give us more phrases to repeat. But every so often, he would write on the board, and we'd think it was a mistake, but it wasn't. Okay. He would actually have us inhale and then come up. Om Namo Namaha, which of course means we have to inhale when we do this movement. Om Namo Namaha. So I'll invite you to try that both ways. Again, this is a tapas thing for the breath for some of us, where if we're not used to reversing the breath. And you're all on mute, so we're not going to get weird feedback and stuff, right? But just that one phrase, Om Namo Namaha, and try it on the movement where you're coming down a couple of times. And then try it on the movement where you're coming up. Now, the reason I have the stool here is that for some people, that's as far as they should go, right? So, Om Namo Namaha, and I'm tucking my arms behind me here, right? Or I can have my arms extended in front of me and going to the stool. Om Namo Namaha. I'm going to do one more of each. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Now, I'm going to reverse that. So, Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha.
Folks, I, of course, am only seeing tiny little boxes of you, but it doesn't look like many of you are chanting. Are most of you just moving without the vocalization?
It's whatever. You can be just exhaling, or you can be using the chant. Using the chant to make a certain point about some of the ways that he taught. He would make you forget how hard you were working by giving you something else that distracted you. He would put a sound you were supposed to chant where he wanted an exhale. He wouldn't say, we're going to exhale in this movement where you're usually inhaling, okay? He wouldn't go into a whole song and dance about what he was doing or why he was doing it. He would just say, chant here. And he knows that chanting is an exhale, right? And as I said, when he would put that sort of thing on the board, we would all go, that's a mistake. And it's like, well, no, this is what we're doing. right? He was teaching about tapas. Now, also, he had enough of an awareness of the body from an engineering perspective, although he never really spoke explicitly about the anatomy, right? And we're not on speaker view. Hang on, let me put it on speaker view. He never explicitly spoke about anatomy, which kind of drove me crazy in the beginning, because that was like a big focus of mine. And I had a lot of curiosity, and I had questions, I wanted answers, and he didn't really talk that way. So at a certain point, I realized that, you know, if I have these questions and they're important to me, I'd have to kind of figure a lot of this out on my own. See, I thought because he was trained as an engineer and he had more of a Western perspective than his father, he'd have the anatomy just down, you know, and I'd have these conversations with him about the abdominals and the diaphragm and the spine, and it was like, this is not his thing. And yet, as an engineer, he knew enough to, we have someone? Okay. He knew enough to be very aware of the fact that, like just now, when I reversed that breathing pattern and I was exhaling with the chant as I was coming up and inhaling as I was coming down, it completely changed my center of gravity. It changed the action of the muscles on either side of that movement in terms of what had to lengthen and what had to shorten, right? There was something really profoundly different about how my body had to figure out how to do those movements based on whether I was inhaling up or exhaling up, or inhaling down or exhaling down. What he would also then do, and it's simple enough, is like, okay, now we're going to try all of that with one knee forward of the other, just a couple of inches, right? So I'm going to do that now. I'll invite you to try that as well. It doesn't matter which knee, because we're going to do the other one in a minute, but exact same thing that we just did, just with one knee slightly forward. Om Namo Namaha. And I'm going to come down with my arms straight instead of folding behind me. Om Namo Namaha. Now I'm going to do the same with my knees offset, but the reverse, so-called reverse breathing. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Okay. I'm going to try that whole thing with the other offset in my knees. Now, I didn't say right knee forward or left knee forward, you know, you can choose, but it's interesting why we make those choices. You know, did I just instinctively do my easy side? I don't know. Let's see. Let's see if this is my hard side. It usually is a hard side and an easy side. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. Now I'm going to reverse. Om Namo Namaha. Wow, I almost fell on my face there. That was dangerous. Okay. Om Namo Namaha. Om Namo Namaha. And now I'm going to even out my knees. And I'm just going to do simple movements. I don't have to use the sound right now. I'm just going to come down and rest. So the other thing that using this stool does for me is because I can have a little bit of my weight here, it allows me to sink my pelvis a little more fully into this kind of Vajrasana position. If I was here, my knees would really feel it, but it shifts my center, it shifts my weight in a way that lets my knees move a little bit more freely. So we'll be coming back to the mats in a little while, but I just wanted to invite you back to your screens here and see what you all noticed on that one. I really truly almost fell on my face on that last one, inhaling on the way down with my knees, with my left knee a little bit forward of my right knee.
So do you think that's a reflection of the
Asymmetry in my body? Oh yeah.
Your back? No, in your
Yeah.
spine? Because you have that particular.
I do.
Yeah.
What happened was I had managed to amplify rather than neutralize the asymmetry in my spine, and adding that to an inhale on the way down, because of how that kind of changed the way I was able to support with my abdominals and how hard I would have had to work with my back to compensate. It just, something didn't fire up that needed to keep me, you know, to restrain the forward momentum of my body weight. And I was like, whoa, and I just tipped right off my knees. That was fun. So anyone else have anything of interest to share about that little thing? Simple stuff, right? It's not complicated, but it produces enough of variance in the equation of this simple practice that we can notice certain things that we otherwise might not notice, right? So anyone? I'm curious what you may have felt in any of that. Was some of it hard, some of it easy, weird, annoying, whatever? What? Yeah. Andrea, are you holding a microphone? Is that a microphone? Okay. Oh, no, okay, it looked like a microphone. Go ahead.
This is energizing. This one feels like a workout. The chanting is excellent. Not only partially probably because it takes the thinking of the intensity of the movement, but it's just a very calming, soothing element for me. Chanting for me. I caught myself.
Yeah, you did. You were wandering away from the first person there, but you caught yourself. That was great. Yeah.
It will take some time. And I noticed that I need a padding underneath my knee because one little bone is just bony and
Yeah. I'm sorry. I almost always remind people to make sure that if they need it, they have padding under their knees. And I apologize. That's something I actually overlooked there, and I do apologize. I mean, I'm on a mat on a rug with padding under the rug, and my knees do need padding, but it was just sort of there. And I didn't remember to remind you guys. So yeah, bony knees need padding. Yeah. So you said energizing and relaxing. You said both.
Both,
yeah.
Both ways are giving me both experiences.
Interesting.
Like it's the reverse breathing is always challenging for me, but I enjoy it personally.
Okay. You enjoy a challenge.
Yes, I do. I have one question though. Since it's a forward fold and it's a pretty big one, you would not necessarily instruct to engage the abdominals or inner thighs or anything, because the person who is practicing would do it anyway, or you would instruct, therefore the lower back is a bit more protective. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well,
Question.
yeah. Okay. So what I can extrapolate from that question is a broader issue, which is the kind of cueing that gets used that promotes this idea that we need to be micromanaging our muscular actions in order to make something safe or effective is what I would challenge. That's not how our body works. This micromanaging of this, then this, then this, you know, if you engage here, it'll protect you there, this and that. If we're in that frame of focus while we're practicing, something more organic, more holistic is missing. See, our brains, now this, you know, there was the question about the sympathetic parasympathetic, which are the divisions of the autonomic nervous system. In a similar way, there's some very common conversations about brain function and how we process information in the two hemispheres of our brain, right hemisphere, left hemisphere, right? And that turns out to be not as strong a division as some people would have you believe, because it's based on pathology. Normal functioning brains, there's a lot of crossover of specialization between the hemispheres. But what we associate with left hemisphere linear language logic-based processing, you know, and when you're cueing asana, the words are coming out of my mouth. When I'm cueing asana, the words are coming out of my mouth one at a time, just as they are now. And the part of your brain that can understand and translate language into concepts and action is depending on that way of processing information, which is very linear. It's very this, then this, then this, then this. But that's not how your muscles work. That's not how your body works. And trying to get your body to work along the lines of linguistic processing will lead to limited results. The other way our brain processes, of course, is what's associated with the right hemisphere, which is more global processing. It's where we can experience things in their wholeness, their completeness, not their parts. It's where imagery gets developed. I would much rather teach with an image than with a specific set of actions of this, then this, then this. I mean, if I wanted you to hold your arms a certain way in Virabhadrasana, you know, I could say, okay, I want you to flex your shoulder and then, you know, downwardly rotate your scapula. And I could give a whole, you know, like, who the hell wants to hear that? I mean, is that how you want to be relating to your body? You know, I could also say things like, you know, make a shape, like make your arms parallel, touch your hands, whatever. You know, I could relate the body cueing to some kind of Euclidean geometry of angles and lines or whatever, you know, of which there are none in the body. There's no straight lines in the body, right? Or I could say, how would your arms be shaped if you were holding a soap bubble? A big, round, spherical, fragile bubble of soap. What if also spherically you were experiencing the breath in your body and your arms wanted to honor the breath in all its dimensions, side to side, front to back, top to bottom? It would make you not want to do this or do this, right? So there's that whole other way of processing information that relates to the body as a whole instead of parts that need to be micromanaged, which I think it often goes missing in our zeal to make the thing correct, to get the right thing to happen in the body. So do I cue occasionally for the exhale to originate in an abdominal action? Sure, I'm just naming them. I'm using some named muscles that we all relate to being in a certain region of our body. I'm naming a region where an action can occur, right? by saying lower abdominals. But that's different than that sort of reductionistic way of manipulating the musculature to produce certain effects. So yeah, I hope that's clear. Because the body doesn't have parts, you know. We talk about body parts, but you need a sharp instrument to turn a body into parts. You really do. A living body that's not being cut up by something sharp has no parts. You know, everything is related to everything else in a continuum of tissue and flow and function and layers that are all interpenetrating and interrelating. You know, Amy would often say this, you know, your femur doesn't know it's a femur, right? Like, well, it's a femur's a name. It doesn't know that it's named femur. Why don't you ask your leg what it wants to be called? Maybe your leg wants to be called Petunia. That's a direct quote from Amy. I thought that was a great conversation. So, move your Petunia 3 inches to the left. Yeah. So anything else about that little practice, the little, you know, Vajrasana kind of vinyasa that we were doing? Was it really difficult to get the breath to reverse? Or was it easy? No, wasn't difficult? Okay. I had to think about it. Did you find, like I did, there was like one combination of leg asymmetry and breath coordination that felt like really destabilizing, like hard to balance, hard to make the movement go smoothly? That's usually the case, you know, particularly when you make your base a little asymmetrical against the asymmetry that you have. When you step into your existing asymmetry, it kind of neutralizes it. When you step against it, it amplifies it. And that was definitely what was happening when I came down. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. I just almost fell on my face. So there's those really interesting moments of insight from just a tiny little, you know, inch or two offset of the knees can produce a huge difference in how a movement like that might feel. So, Lydia, I see you've retreated to the indoors. Has it just gotten dark outside or cold?
Not dark, just chilly.
Just chilly. Okay. All right. Yeah. So any questions? I'm kind of, are you guys a little burnt on the screen here or the practice? Because I'm feeling like our interactivity has plummeted. I gave you some things to do and some stuff to notice, and I'm just curious what you noticed, but you're all looking a little screen shocked at the moment. So,
We actually, Christy and I were just having a little private conversation about that it felt like, I felt like we were losing people. And I know I'm tired.
Well, we have literally lost people. They've logged off. I suppose they're going to watch the recording or something. Yeah.
But I'm just trying to think of what we can do. You know, Zoom is a bitch. It's hard. It's a hell of a lot more interesting.
Zoom is a hard bitch? You just said Zoom is a hard bitch, basically.
Okay. But is there anything that we can do, folks, to help keep the energy up?
I'm tempted to teach a lengthy shavasana, but then we would completely lose everyone. I was saving a shavasana for the end, but you know, there's no coming back from that. You know, that's got to be the end thing.
But we have about half an hour left. Do you want to do like a 10-minute practice, just focus practice, and then 20 minutes of shavasana? It looks like we've got a bunch of people saying yes, yes, yes. So can we just do more concentrated practice, even if it wasn't in the plan? So
no, my plan is just to do what serves you guys best. You know,
let's get up and bust some ass.
My plans are all highly tentative, right? Okay, I'll tell you what. If you need to take a little break now, go pee, do something, take a sip of water, do that, take a few minutes, we'll come back and we'll finish up with about a half hour or so practice plus shavasana. And we'll do that. Okay, so I'm gonna go visit the little boy's room and I'll be right back. We're staying logged in, just walking away. You know what? I should turn off my mic if I'm using the bathroom. That's not a good look if I keep that on. Okay, looks like most of us are back. Few people still waiting to return. Lydia, am I being heard? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. All right, cool. So, sticking with our theme of Brahmana Langana, we're going to start with some standing work. And okay, yeah, we've got that camera on. Do we? No, that's not the camera I want. This one. Okay, so this will be a good lead into our topic tomorrow, where we really talk about spinal articulation and forward and backward bending and other things. So this is a dynamic variation of Utkatasana, which is also known as awkward pose, okay? And I'll show you how we're going to do it. It's almost a standing version of what we were just doing in our knees. So this is where the exhale will take us, to this shape. Notice how my thighs are just about parallel to the floor, and my neck is released so the weight of my head is falling forward. And then the inhale takes me to here, and the exhale returns me to where I started. Now, this is a classically characteristic technique of Desikachar's, which is to get the movement in your spine to link up with the movement of breath in and out of your body. And so the inhale comes in at the top and moves down. And so that means that the way we move our spine during these inhales is to move the top of the spine first, and then let the movement of this backward bend travel downward towards the bottom of the spine. With the exhale, which travels upward, that's the direction the spinal articulation is going. So if you watch carefully as I do that again, you'll see that that's what I'm hoping to demonstrate for you. As I exhale here, this forward fold, the flexion of my spine is entering my spine from the bottom towards the top. It ends with my head dropping. The inhale reverses that. My head, my neck lift first, my sternum lifts, and then actually before I even get to my lower spine, I'm lifting with my legs. I don't want that lifting action of coming back up to get into here.
Leslie, could you show us once facing the other direction, please? So, because you're at
This
3/4.
way?
Yeah.
This way?
Yes, please.
Okay, okay. So here's the exhale. Flexion enters my spine from the bottom to the top. Extension as I inhale from the top towards the bottom. And then my legs lift me before my lumbar spine lifts me.
Leslie, can I just call attention that the your flexion beginning is actually the drawing in of your lower abdominals to help the exhale start moving up, because it's not a big move. It's very difficult to see. It's not a huge, you're not going to see a big curve in his lower belly, but in his lower back. That's where it is.
Honey, I know, but I was avoiding, as per our previous conversation, saying that. That was going to be part of the.
I blew it, didn't I?
Yeah, just like I'm working my way through the setup, and you're already hitting the punchline. Damn you. Anyway, because part of the inquiry would have been, oh, well, how do I need to actually initiate my exhale to get that flexion to start of my lumbar spine? Guess what? Big surprise, it's the action of the lower abdominals. Woohoo! Okay, thanks, honey. I've got to wire you up with like an electric current so I can hit a button when that starts happening. Okay, so yes, that is part of it. But the thing I wanted to point out about coming up, which is really important, is this backward bending action. It kind of reaches to the base of my thoracic spine, and before it enters my lumbar spine, that's when the legs take me the rest of the way. So let's give that a try, and I'll cue you through it the first couple of times, but then, you know, really go at your own pace. Everyone's breath and length of movement is a little different here, so, you know, I don't want to have you moving more quickly or more slowly than is natural for you. But I'll cue you through it the first couple of times. So we're standing in a comfortable samastiti, heels under sitting bones. Okay. With an inhale, the arms raise. And with an exhale, I start coming forward. And that forward flexion is entering my spine from the bottom to the top. It ends with the weight of my head releasing.
And your knees should be quite bent at this
And then
point.
as I inhale, I reach the spine out and up, and I let my legs take me the rest of the way before my lumbar spine can do the lifting. As I said earlier when I was demonstrating, yes, my knees are quite bent. It's almost like a downhill skier's position. So the thighs are almost parallel to the floor. So that's why they call it awkward pose. You're really engaging these big muscles in your thighs. So once more, the inhale, the arms raise. Exhale, I fold forward over my thighs, release my neck and head.
Really drop your butt.
My arms out, lift up, and exhale. So continue at your own pace. This is that classic linking of spinal articulation with the movements of breath, of prana apana, as we like to say. I would like to see, the technique actually is when you're coming up, reach your arms to the side walls, not in front of you. As you're coming up out of that Utkatasana, if you reach your arms out to the side and spiral your arms open, it'll probably give you a better chance of lifting your sternum than if you shoot your arms straight in front of you, right? So, and then the main thing there is to, again, feel how your legs actually take you the rest of the way to standing and not your lumbar spine. There you go. So it's about flexion and extension of the spine coordinated with breath. Beautiful. So, okay, and now relax. And we have some feedback to give you guys individually, but we're just gonna move on here, okay? So from there, if we come into a stance, like, am I more visible facing this way? Is that preferable? I think maybe, yeah? Let's see. Okay, like this, yeah. So this is what I would call Parshva Utkatasana. It's the same exact thing we're doing with the spine, except we're folding over one bent leg instead of two. Where's the other leg? Well, it's back here because we're in kind of this warrior stance, right? And it's that same stance I coached earlier. You know, it's not that huge step. It's one I can get out of with just my leg strength, okay? And I want to keep all 3 points of my feet in contact with the earth. But now, same exact thing over a different base. So, and I'm not squaring my hips, by the way. I'm turning my whole spine to the front. So there's a twist involved in my pelvis because of my leg placement, and there's a counter twist involved in my spine as I come round to the front. So that's part of the picture of what the spine's doing here. So same thing. I exhale and fold over that front leg, flexion coming in from the bottom to the top, and then extension coming in from the top to the bottom. And the same thing, I feel my legs kind of come under me and support that movement before I crank it into my lumbar spine. So the inhale bends my knee, the exhale folds me over that bent knee, The next inhale articulates me into extension off of that bent knee. And then the final exhale, the front leg straightens and my arms drop. I'm back where I started. So that is a 2-breath vinyasa for what I'm calling Parshva, side version of Utkatasana. All right. So just do a couple more of those and then switch to the other side and give that a try. So this is what we'd call a kind of a Brahmana practice. You're using the biggest muscles in your body, the leg muscles, the gluteals. They take a lot of oxygen. They're big sweeping movements of the arms and the spine. The breath is quite deep to supply all that oxygen to those muscles. And there's a lot to keep track of. There's an intense kind of focus that's required, which is, again, a function of Brahmana. Yeah. So again, if we were giving individual coaching on some of the things we're seeing, we could talk about it in a lot of detail, and we will get to this tomorrow, okay? But that's not our focus right now. Our focus is just to feel Brahmana Langana, okay? So now, once you've completed both sides, let's return to more symmetrical stance, which is more samastiti. And finally, the Uttanasana version of this, where the legs are not necessarily locked at the knee, perfectly straight, but are straighter than certainly than in Utkatasana. So now I'm releasing into this flexion from the base of my spine all the way through to the crown of my head. And then as I inhale, I'm sweeping back up, making sure that I don't continue that lifting action into my lumbars, that my legs and feet press down to lift my body up to standing. That lifting action I get out of Uttanasana with my inhale, it only goes as far as the base of my thoracic spine, doesn't enter my lumbars. And just a couple more times for that at your own pace. And then once you've done that, feel free to stand and breathe for a moment or two, and then lie down. Okay. So the next bit we'll be doing from supine. Pull this back so I'm more fully in view. There we go. Okay. So now I'm lying on my back with my knees bent, my feet flat on the floor. And if we were to continue this idea of linking the action of articulating through the spine from bottom to top with the action of exhaling and inhaling, the pattern that might work would be, as I exhale, I lift my sacrum, my lumbar, my thoracic off the floor, all the way up to right around my shoulder blades. And then as I inhale, I articulate in the other direction towards my tail. So that's actually exhaling as I articulate my spine up off the floor, and then inhaling as I drop it back down. Now, there's no requirement to take as deep and full breaths as you possibly can. This isn't about the maximum amount of air you can be moving in and out of your body right now. Okay? It's about just enough breath to get the job done. In fact, what if you didn't even think of breathing at all and just let the movements of your spine on their own feel like they can move the air out of you and draw it back into you? So it's almost like your leg muscles and the other muscles that you're using to raise and lower your pelvis are now your breathing muscles. And your spine is just releasing and articulating up and down, permitting that action to reach into and out of your lungs. So just do that a couple more times with that idea in mind. And then bring yourself to rest. On the floor, and just check in with your body. This is a little couple of minutes here that I like to devote to what I call free-form counterposing. I see some of you already sort of rocking from side to side or doing some additional movements for your spine, for your legs, for whatever it feels like you need to do for you right now. Because the idea is that you're going to come to rest in a shavasana in a couple of minutes. And you want to be comfortable doing that. So what would your body like to do between right now in this moment and a moment, a couple of minutes in the future when you'll be comfortable lying still for a bit in shavasana? If you need to get a prop or an eye bag or a bolster or something like that, that's fine. This would be the time to do that. Yeah, that's right. Turn off the lights. I saw that. That's good. Anything you need to adjust your space, to adjust your body so that you can come to rest. And what we're going to do is, I'm not going to end this by saying everyone sit up, Om, and we're done. You're just, I'm going to let you stay there if you want. You want to be there for the next half hour, that's fine with me. That's the beauty of teaching to people who are in their homes. You don't have to go anywhere after your shavasana, right? There we go. Cool. So the way I'm going to cue us here in the shavasana is consistent with our topics that we're covering tomorrow, which have to do with articulating the spine, what it means to be doing a forward bend, what it means to be doing a backward bend. So I'm going to do a body scan that sort of takes the contours of the body and the spine into account. And the nice thing is if you feel yourself drifting off and you just don't get past your calves or something, that's fine. You can always review the recording later on. So I'd like you to pay attention now to your heels, to the weight, the body weight you have that's in your heels as they rest on the surface. Notice the shape of that curve of your heels. It's convex towards the earth, right? It curves towards the earth. We're going to call that a primary curve. I'll explain what that means tomorrow. But it's the same curve you have in your sacrum, in your thoracic spine, right? Convex in the direction of the earth when you're lying on your back. And just notice the weight there. Notice the contact you have with the earth in that curve of the heels. If you move your attention up just a little bit from there, you'll notice there's a curve that goes the other way. It is the curve of the Achilles tendon. And that's the curve that arches away from the earth. It's what we call the secondary curve. And that's the curve you would have in your lumbar and cervical spine in this position. So notice the space between you and the earth. And that's all we'll be doing. We're tracing these curves all the way up the back of the body. And notice how there's an undulation of these curves that alternate between contact, places of release of weight into the supporting surface, and places where there's space between you and the supporting surface, where space comes under your body. If you go up from the Achilles curve, you'll find a curve in the calf area. And just notice the contact there. Notice how you can release a little bit into that support. You go a little further above the calf, there's a little space that shows up behind the knee. How far does that space go? How far can you trace your awareness up the back of your leg until you find contact again, until you find a curve that arches its way towards the earth, a curve into which you can settle your weight and release. Certainly when you get up to the area of the gluteals and the sacrum, there's weight, release available there. Release into the support of the earth. Above the sacrum, if we move our attention up a little bit, we'll find another area where space comes under us. That's that secondary curve of the lumbar spine. That space should be there, it belongs there. A little higher up, there's a place where your weight re-enters the support of the earth into the thoracic spine. That's a primary curve, a curve that curves towards the earth in this position. Just notice where you can release. Where is there weight? Where is there movement? Is there breath movement there? Is there articulation in the moving parts that help you breathe? Maybe not just your weight, but your awareness of your breath can settle there now too. Move your attention up a little higher till it gets to that place between your shoulder blades. And from there, can you extend your awareness out across the backs of your arms? And find where there's a distribution of weight and space. This is different for everyone. There's a lot of individual differences in arm shape and contour. contact and space in this position. Just notice, where's their support? Where's their space? All the way out to the backs of the wrists, hands, fingers. Bring your awareness back in towards the center of the body and up a little higher, a little further up than the shoulder blades. You'll eventually find a space there. Space beneath the secondary curve of your cervical spine, of your neck. Keep going up. There's a major place of contact there. There's a major primary curve. It's the shape of the back of your skull. Feel your weight settling there and releasing into the support of the earth. Can you sweep your awareness from the back of your skull, up the back of your head, over the crown of your head, all the way around to the ridge of your brow? That's one big curve. Can you feel the muscles just beneath your skin letting go in the scalp, in the face, around your eyes, your nose, your mouth, your jaw? And what about some of the muscles inside your skull? The soft palate, the throat, the tongue, they can all settle into the support of gravity. Can you notice the passage of air into and out of your body through those spaces in your skull? Can you follow that breath down into your system where it's rising and falling, just like the waves at the ocean, coming and going? Not under your control, the waves at the ocean. Can you enjoy the waves of your breath in the same way, without any illusion you're controlling them? Can you be the observer of the breath and not the controller of the breath? Can you be the space through which the breath is moving, rising and falling, coming and going? And just be with your breath, your body, your space for as long as you like. And we will reconvene again tomorrow. And I do encourage you to review the recording of this and see which body part you got up to before you perhaps drifted off. Until then, keep the space. See you tomorrow.